They said I'd never amount to anything. Call me the family's biggest mistake. But when they were about to lose everything, the only person who could save them was me. Imagine being the one everyone whispers about, the one who never measured up, the black sheep. For years, I carried that label until the day life forced me to prove them all wrong. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about silence, strength, and the moment you realize your worth doesn't depend on their approval. If you've ever been underestimated, hit like right now and subscribe because this story changes everything. Growing up as a disappointment shapes you in ways people don't see. The constant comparisons, the backhanded compliments, the way family meetings feel like silent trials where you're always a defendant. But what happens when the tables turn? The label sticks early. From the moment I could understand words, I knew I was different, not in a special way, in a why can't you just fit in way. School was the first battleground. My siblings brought home trophies. I brought home notes from teachers. Bright but distracted, they'd write as if creativity were a flaw. Family gatherings were worse. Aunt Linda would gush over my cousin's straight A's, then turn to me with a tight smile. Well, at least you're artistic. The word hung in the air like an apology. Holidays became performances where I played the role of the work in progress, the one who needed fixing. Even my wins were muted. When I finally scored well on a math test, the response wasn't pride. It was, see what happens when you try, as if effort was something I'd been withholding out of spite. The comparisons weren't just casual. They were currency. My brother's football stats, my sister's debate trophies. They were proof I was falling behind. Dinner conversations revolve around their futures, colleges, internships, potential. My contributions met with polite nods before the subject changed. The message was clear. I was the outlier, the question mark in a family of exclamation points. By high school, the label wasn't just whispered, it was branded. You got so much potential if you just apply yourself. Became code for you're wasting our time. Teachers echoed it, relatives reinforced it, and eventually I started to believe it. The cruelest part? They framed it as concern. We just want what's best for you, they'd say, while their actions scream, you'll never be enough. I learned to laugh it off, to play the class clown, because if I was supposed to be the disappointment, I'd at least give them a performance worth remembering. But behind the jokes, the truth festered. No matter what I did, I'd already been cast in a role I never auditioned for. The tragedy wasn't their low expectations. It was how I let them shape mine. Years later, I'd realized something vital. Labels only stick if you stop moving. But back then, I was a statue, frozen in their narrative, waiting for someone to see me as more than a punchline to a joke I didn't write. The breaking point. There's a moment when silence becomes louder than words, when a single sentence carves itself into your bones and changes everything. For me, it happened on a Tuesday. I'd come home late after working double shifts at the diner, my shoes still sticky with spilled soda, my hands smelling of grease no amount of washing could remove. They were all in the living room. The golden child showing off his new promotion, the perfect daughter discussing her scholarship, and me, the ghost at the family gathering. Then I heard it, not whispered, but stated as simple fact. Some people just don't have it in them. The words weren't even meant for me to hear, which made them cut deeper. That's when I understood the truth. I wasn't a project they were trying to fix. I was a lost cause they'd quietly given up on. That night, I stared at my ceiling for hours, replaying every backhanded compliment, every disappointed sigh, every time they'd celebrated someone else's achievements while barely acknowledging my existence. The realization hit like ice water. I was investing in people who'd never believe in me. So I made a decision with a clarity that only comes from complete emotional exhaustion. At 3:17 a.m., I packed one duffel bag with everything that truly mattered, some clothes, my laptop, and the $427 I'd painstakingly saved beneath my mattress. I left my house key on the kitchen counter, the metal clicking against granite, sounding like a period at the end of a sentence I'd been trying to rewrite for years. The morning air smelled like rain as I walked to the bus station, my phone buzzing with unanswered calls that grew increasingly frantic. But here's what they never understood. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't a tantrum. This was survival. I wasn't running away from home. I was finally running toward myself. The bus ride out of town felt like crossing some invisible threshold between the person they thought I was and the person I might become. As the city limit sign disappeared behind me, I made two promises to myself. I would never again beg for approval from people who conditioned their love on my performance, and one day, whether they wanted to admit it or not, they would remember my name differently, not as a disappointment, but as the one who got away, the struggle in silence. The first 90 days were a masterclass in humiliation disguised as independence. That $427 evaporated faster than dignity at a payday loan office. I learned the art of strategic hunger, how to stretch a $1 convenience store hot dog into 2 meals, how coffee shops offer free refills if you nurse a single purchase for hours while job hunting on their Wi-Fi. Shelter became a rotating puzzle. Couches of near strangers who'd pity me for a night. 24-hour laundromats with a hum of dryers masked my exhausted tears. Park benches that served as beds until security guards ruined the illusion. Every rejection email felt personal. We went with another candidate, a confirmation of their low expectations. But here's what no one tells you about rock bottom. It makes an excellent foundation. I took jobs that would have made my family cringe. Scrubbing toilets at truck stops, stuffing envelopes in windowless offices, handing out flyers in a mascot costume during August heat waves. The work bruised my body but sharpened my resolve. I memorized the bus schedules to save walking miles and worn-out shoes. I washed my clothes in gas station sinks and dried them with paper towels. I learned which grocery stores threw out edible food at closing time. Each small survival became a quiet rebellion against their narrative. The irony? While they imagined me failing spectacularly in some alleyway, I was undergoing the most rigorous education of my life. University of Adversity, majoring in resilience. Those months taught me more about human nature than any classroom ever could. Who would look through you like glass, who would slip you an extra bread roll pretending not to notice your hunger, who would exploit desperation with a smile. I collected these lessons like armor, each one hardening my determination. The hunger, the exhaustion, the bone-deep loneliness, they became my secret weapons. While my peers complained about entry-level salaries, I was surviving on half that. While they stressed about office politics, I'd already faced far worse on the streets. The world had tried to break me with concrete and fluorescent lights and cold nights, but underestimated the stubbornness of someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The first win. The email notification almost didn't register at first. Just another corporate rejection lost in the sea of impersonal, unfortunately, messages cluttering my inbox. But this one was different. The subject line simply read, "Your article," followed by something I'd never seen before, a $, $50. For 500 words about my experience as a night shift cleaner. Not a fortune, but validation in its purest form. Someone valuing my perspective enough to pay for it. That PayPal notification hit differently than any paycheck before. This wasn't compensation for my time or labor, but for my mind. The transaction felt illicit somehow, like I discovered a secret backdoor into a world I wasn't supposed to access. I immediately reinvested the windfall into a library card and a thrift store blazer for future video calls. The fabric still carrying someone else's history in its slightly shiny elbows. That first assignment became my obsession. I revised it 17 times, researched the publication's tone like it was a Da Vinci Code, and when it published, I refreshed the page compulsively watching the view counter climb. Strangers' comments about how the piece resonated created a new kind of high. Not the fleeting relief of surviving another day, but the electric thrill of being truly seen. The editor's follow-up request for 3 more articles made my hands shake. Suddenly, ramen dinners tasted like steak because I was no longer eating it as a failure, but as an investment. That $50 bought more than groceries. It purchased the first shred of evidence that maybe, just maybe, the problem hadn't been me all along. Maybe I'd simply been trying to fit into spaces never meant to hold me, like forcing a square peg into a round hole, while everyone stood around criticizing my hammer technique. The realization crept in slowly. What if my so-called flaws, the overthinking they called distraction, the sensitivity they called weakness, the unconventional perspective they called impractical, were actually my competitive advantages in a different arena. That first payment proved something dangerous and beautiful. There was a marketplace for my particular set of cracked, mismatched skills. I began seeing my past struggles not as shameful secrets to hide, but as raw material only I could shape into something valuable. The world had tried to convince me my worth came from following predetermined paths. But that $50 deposit was the first clue that the real treasure lay in the unbeaten trail I'd been forced to carve for myself. The grind no one saw. Midnight oil burned in ways they'd never comprehend. While they posted tropical vacation selfies with #blessed captions, I was teaching myself graphic design through pirated software tutorials, the blue glow of my secondhand laptop etching permanent shadows beneath my eyes. Every quiet hour became a stolen opportunity. Studying analytics during lunch breaks, practicing sales pitches in my bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., transforming my tiny studio apartment into a war room papered with handwritten goals and rejection letters turned motivation fuel. The numbers told a secret story only I could read. $87 turned into $300, then $500, then the Holy Grail. 4 figures in a single month. I celebrated these invisible milestones with rituals they'd find pathetic. A slightly nicer brand of instant coffee, a new notebook before the old one was completely filled, the luxury of turning the heat up 1 degree when winter bit through my thin walls. My social media became a carefully constructed illusion. Posts timed to appear during normal business hours, when in reality I was working in the ragged hours between darkness and dawn, my unwashed hair stuffed under a beanie, surviving on adrenaline, and the quiet thrill of outworking everyone who'd ever doubted me. The isolation should have broken me, but it became my superpower. No distractions, no committees of opinion. Just pure obsessive focus on proving my worth to the one audience that mattered, myself. I developed a sixth sense for opportunity, spotting gaps in the market that mirror the gaps in my own experience. Who better to create content for struggling students than someone who'd been one? Who understood financial desperation better than someone who'd counted pennies for laundry detergent? My greatest disadvantage became my unique selling proposition. While they were busy building perfect LinkedIn personas, I was accumulating the kind of real-world education no prestigious university could offer. The curriculum of hunger, the diploma of duct-tape resilience. Each small victory was sweeter for having been earned alone, without cheerleaders or safety nets, the silence of my struggle making the eventual triumph that much more intoxicating when it finally came. The turning point. The revelation came unexpectedly while staring at a client's disastrous website copy, the kind of corporate jargon salad that made my stomach turn. In that moment, something clicked with terrifying clarity. I could do better blindfolded. Not just better, but transformative. The words flowed effortlessly as I rewrote the entire homepage in 20 feverish minutes, translating their meaningless buzzwords into human language that actually sparked emotion. When the client's response arrived, a stunned, "This is exactly what we've been trying to say for years," the earth shifted beneath me. Copywriting wasn't just some random skill I'd stumbled into. It was the perfect alchemy of all my so-called weaknesses. My overthinking became attention to nuance. My sensitivity became emotional intelligence. My outsider perspective became the ability to articulate what others couldn't see. Suddenly, every odd job, every failed attempt, every humiliating moment became valuable research. Those months handing out flyers taught me what makes people stop or walk away. Those nights cleaning offices gave me insight into how businesses really operated behind the polished facade. Even my family's dismissal had trained me to spot insincerity in language from miles away. I began approaching each project like a psychological puzzle, not just selling products, but diagnosing why someone would hesitate to buy them in the first place. My rates inched upward with each satisfied client, but the real currency was their shock when they discovered the scruffy freelancer they'd underestimated could outperform their entire marketing department. Word spread quietly at first, then like wildfire. Former clients became evangelists, describing my work with phrases like uncanny understanding and alchemical transformation. The greatest irony? The very traits my family had dismissed as impractical, my obsession with words, my tendency to overanalyze emotions, my refusal to accept surface-level answers, were suddenly in high demand. Businesses paid premium prices for perspective I'd been punished for having. That first four-figure invoice didn't just mark financial survival. It was vindication on a cosmic scale. Proof that what made me different wasn't a liability, but my greatest asset. The misfit had found her niche, and it fit better than anywhere I'd ever been forced to belong before. The silent rise. Success arrived not with fanfare, but in quiet deposits that would have shocked my former critics. The first time my checking account balance didn't plummet after paying rent. The day I realized I could replace my thrift store shoes without calculating meals to sacrifice. The moment a luxury apartment application was approved without a co-signer. By 25, I'd surpassed what my parents earned combined, yet maintained the anonymity of someone still struggling. My LinkedIn stayed sparse while my offshore accounts grew fat. I cultivated two separate realities. The invisible ghost they still imagined drowning in failure, and a thriving entrepreneur whose clients included Fortune 500 companies and celebrity personal brands. The duality became its own kind of armor. Their continued underestimation protected me from their sudden interest. I watched from afar as family members hit predictable milestones. The safe careers, the sensible marriages, the mortgage homes that came with golden handcuffs. Meanwhile, I built an empire on my own terms, answering to no corporate ladder or arbitrary benchmarks of success. The luxury wasn't the material possessions, though a properly fitted suit and ergonomic office chair were revelations, but in the ultimate privilege they'd never understand. Complete freedom. Freedom to work naked at 2 p.m. if I chose, to take Wednesday afternoons off for museum visits, to turn down clients whose values didn't align with mine. My childhood home still carried the faint scent of their disappointment whenever I visited for obligatory holidays. But now I recognize it for what it was, the musty odor of people who stopped growing. They'd ask polite questions about my little writing hobby, never suspecting that hobby paid for my BMW lease in cash or that the small apartment I mentioned was a penthouse with skyline views. The greatest power wasn't in correcting their assumptions, but in no longer needing to. Their ignorance became insulation against their potential demands, their lack of curiosity a gift that allowed my empire to grow undisturbed. I cultivated a small circle of fellow entrepreneurs who understood this double life. We joked about our secret agent wealth over bottles of wine that cost more than our first month's rent. They became my chosen family, people who celebrated my success without caveats or jealousy. Meanwhile, back in my hometown, my legend remained frozen in time. Still the disappointment. Still the cautionary tale. Let them think whatever kept them satisfied. The truth was my best-kept secret, and secrets I'd learned were power. Their downfall. The voicemail came through at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, that particular hour when nothing good ever arrives. My brother's voice, stripped of its usual arrogance, cracked with a desperation I'd never heard before. The details came in broken fragments, bad investments, mortgaged assets, some failed business venture that had apparently been their last hope. The family home, that sacred monument to middle-class stability where I'd been a perpetual disappointment, was now just 30 days away from belonging to the bank. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. All those years they'd preached about security, about playing it safe, about following the rules. And yet here they were, about to lose the very foundation they'd built their superiority upon. I listened to the message 3 times, not out of concern, but to savor the surreal poetry of it all. Their golden child's reckless gamble had burned through generations of carefully accumulated equity, while the black sheep had been quietly building an unshakable financial fortress. The frantic follow-up text told their own story. My sister's hysterical, all caps please. My mother's passive-aggressive. We know you can't help, but maybe you know someone who can. My father's stoic, call me when you get this, that couldn't quite mask the panic beneath. I picture the scene at that perfect suburban house. The shouting matches, the tear-stained spreadsheets, the desperate calls of relatives who'd suddenly become busy. They were drowning, and for the first time in their lives, there was no safety net, no backup plan, no proud family name to save them. Just cold, hard math even their precious connections couldn't negotiate away. The home that had never truly felt like mine was now the epicenter of their undoing, and I held all the power to determine its fate with single bank transfer. The universe had delivered the ultimate test, not of my wealth, but of my character. Would I be the bigger person? Or would I finally let them experience the consequences they'd always assured me were coming for someone like me? The answer, it turned out, was far more complicated than simple revenge. The decision, for 3 sleepless nights, I wrestled with a choice that would define me more than any success ever could. Part of me wanted to let the bank take everything. Let them finally understand what real consequences felt like. Let them wander through the wreckage of their own bad decisions, just as they'd watched me do for years. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, asked a dangerous question. Did I want to win or did I want to be free? The numbers were simple. The amount needed to clear their debt represented less than 6 months' income for me now. Not insignificant, but not life-altering either. What weighed more was the emotional calculus. Pain would erase any pretense of my failure, exposing the truth I guarded so carefully. My lawyer drafted the paperwork with clinical efficiency, structuring the transaction as an anonymous loan through a holding company they'd never trace back to me. As I signed the final authorization, I expected to feel triumphant, but instead discovered something far more unsettling: indifference. Their emergency had become just another business decision. Their desperation reduced to columns in a spreadsheet. The money moved at 9:01 a.m. on Monday, timed precisely with the bank's opening hours. No dramatic letter, no cryptic message, just a line item on their mortgage statement they'd likely miss until a loan officer called with bewildered congratulations. I blocked all their numbers before the first notification could arrive, not out of spite, but self-preservation. This wasn't forgiveness, nor was it revenge. It was something far more powerful. It was closure. The transaction severed the last invisible thread connecting me to their expectations, their judgments, their endless cycle of conditional approval. They would keep their precious house with its carefully manicured lawn and family photos where I'd always been cropped slightly out of frame. But I had purchased something far more valuable, absolute certainty that my worth had never been, and would never be, determined by their recognition. The money was gone, but so was the weight I'd carried since childhood. Somewhere between poverty and prosperity, between their contempt and my quiet vengeance, I'd found the rarest currency of all, the unshakable knowledge that I was and always had been enough. The truth comes out. The voicemail arrived 6 weeks later, my mother's voice trembling with a strange cocktail of gratitude and humiliation. The bank had finally revealed their mysterious benefactor after the paperwork cleared, unraveling my carefully constructed anonymity. Her words dissolved into awkward pauses, the weight of their cognitive dissonance almost audible. How could a family failure be their financial savior? My sister's follow-up text read like a hostage negotiation. We need to talk about what happened. But there was nothing left to discuss. The facts spoke for themselves. While they'd been patting themselves on the back for conventional achievements, I'd been amassing the kind of wealth they only whispered about at country clubs. Their subsequent attempt at reconciliation reeked of performative guilt. Sudden invitations to Sunday dinners I'd been excluded from for years, backhanded compliments about my surprising success, transparent attempts to mine my connections for their own benefit. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I held the power now, and it terrified them. Watching them tiptoe around my newfound status was more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. Their forced smiles when introducing me as their entrepreneur daughter, the way they censored their criticism mid-sentence, the desperate overcompensation when showing off the saved house that now secretly belonged to me in every way that mattered. The ultimate revenge wasn't in refusing to help them. It was in helping them without needing anything in return. My silence after the revelation spoke louder than any triumphant speech ever could. They kept waiting for me to gloat, to demand apologies, to finally rub their noses in my success. But true power doesn't beg for acknowledgement. It already knows its worth. The money had saved their home, but the lesson would save them from their own delusions, if they were brave enough to learn it. Some bridges don't need burning. They simply rot away from neglect. And as their frantic messages went unanswered, I realized I had finally given them exactly what they'd always given me: polite indifference. The day they stood in front of the house, they almost lost, realizing the failure had been their only lifeline. This isn't about revenge. It's about realizing your value isn't defined by those who underestimate you. For years, I believed their words, until I didn't. The irony? The very traits they called reckless, my hustle, my refusal to conform, were what saved them. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone your success. Not your time, not your explanation, and certainly not your guilt. Some people will only see your light once it's shining too bright to ignore. So let them call you a disappointment. Keep working, keep growing, and if the day comes when they need help, the choice is yours. But remember, you're not proving anything to them anymore. You're honoring the person you became despite them. If this story hit home, smash that like button. Subscribe for more raw journeys like this. And remember, your comeback is always louder than their doubt. The world will try to name you, but only you get to define what those names mean.